Okay, so welcome to our little show here that we've actually, after just a little bit of thinking, we decided to call Ruby from Scratch. So welcome to Ruby from Scratch. I'm Brian, and my colleague here is
Steve.
Steve.
Steve, broadcasting live from Columbus.
And I'm casting live from Oakland, California. I think I suppose might be good to say Columbus, Ohio, because there's multiple Columbuses.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio. So we're here to teach or help Steve become a web developer from scratch, essentially. He's not as experienced. He's done some programming, but nothing really web-based. So we thought we'd try sort of start working on that. Last week we did a little bit of work with Google SketchUp, but the recording wasn't all that great. So it's up there, but it's not ideal. And I think this is sort of also a good base to start on that anybody could sort of come and learn. So let's maybe go from there. So I'm going to pan over here to Steve's screen, and let's just create a basic HTML page so that we can get an idea for what that's like, and we'll move pretty quickly into a Ruby on Rails application. But I think this will be a good start. So, are you familiar with the concept of tags?
Yeah, just very briefly. I've never done anything with them, but I read the little "Hey, welcome to HTML," website document thing, whatever. So
Gotcha. Cool. So, all HTML pages have an HTML tag around them. So, that's a less than character, and then the HTML, and then a greater than character. So go ahead and type that in.
like that.
Yeah, and then HTML in the middle, like in between. So like the greater than is going to be like there's going to be a less, just a less than HTML, and then just a greater than. Yep. Awesome. And then pretty much all tags in HTML have an end tag. So hit enter a couple times and put another tag, but instead of just the plain tag like you have it, put a slash after the less than. So it's like less than slash
Like that?
forward slash. So that's a backslash. There you go. And then HTML and then greater than. And that is the beginning of an HTML page. And actually,
Okay.
let's save that and try to open it and see what it looks like. Maybe save it on your desktop or somewhere where it'd be easy to get to. And put an .html extension on it. Okay. And then just find that, double click on it. It should open in your browser. Oh, and when you saved it as HTML, Sublime colored it, which is nice.
Oh, cool.
So there you go. That's a blank HTML page.
Sweet.
Which is great. So go back into your editor, and this time put the same tags within the HTML, but they're body tags. So just the word body.
Okay. So delete these or keep these?
Keep those, and you're just going to have essentially nested tags. You might want to also tab so that they're sort of an indication of nesting going on.
Like that?
Yep.
Okay.
And then go on to the next line and do an end body tag. And that's generally when you say an end tag, you're referring to that slash tag there.
Okay.
And then if you save that and go over to your browser, I think also you can hit Control S. That'll is a quick way to save.
Oh, cool.
But you can reload this page. It should look exactly the same. You can open it again, or you can just hit reload on your browser.
Okay.
So that's a blank HTML page. That's very boring. So just put something in the body now. You could put anything really. Perfect. I think there's two L's. I'm not a perfect speller, but I am pretty sure.
Thanks.
And then save. And then over there. And then you can also use Control R, anything really. Excellent.
Very cool.
And you can also use Control R in a browser to reload in pretty much any
Okay.
browser. Yeah. So that's an HTML page. That's the basis of an HTML page is going to be your HTML tag and your body tag. You can also put in a head tag above the body tag, which will contain things like the title of the page. Let's actually put in a title because that's a good example of something you put in there. So it's make a head tag and an end head tag. And then inside the head tag, make a title tag. And actually put the beginning tag and the end tag on the same line is how I would stylistically do it.
So put the beginning tag and the head tag on the same line?
On both on line 3, yeah. So like the head tags are fine. The title tags, I might have misspoke. The title tags should both be on the same line. So like on line 3 at the very end, make an end title tag.
Okay. I got you.
Yeah, I understand that could be confusing. And then within those two tags, type something that's going to be the title of our page. There we go, Ruby from scratch, perfect. And save it, go over. And Control R. And you can see at the top, in the blue bar at the top, Ruby from scratch.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so
very
you
nice.
can control what goes into that per HTML page. You can also put inside the head tag JavaScript files, CSS files. I think there's some other things that can go in there as well, but those are the sort of the main things that you'll end up putting in there. And CSS files, we talked a little bit after the show last week. So for the benefit of listeners, CSS files are there to style the document. They're the place where you should put definitions of color, positioning of certain elements on the page, whether there's borders or bold or italics and things like that. That all goes into the CSS file or the style sheet file. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And then JavaScript files is for programmatic things that you do on the page. Like if you wanted anything really to change dynamically to be something else when you click on a button, you do that via JavaScript generally. So that's sort of a basic overview of that. Let's go inside of the HTML page one more time, and I'll just introduce a couple more tags that are useful. So inside the body, let's actually take anything really and surround it with a span tag, SPAN. And then on the next line, put a div tag, div. And end it and put something inside of it, some text. And save that, look at that again, and we'll sort of see what's happening here. Okay, so we have sort of two lines here. So the span tag and the div tag are two of the more fundamental tags in HTML. Span is for, you can think of it's an inline element, and so what that means is it's sort of like text. Let's actually use a different inline element as sort of a demonstration. If you go back to the document, surround the word really with a strong tag. And then what you'll see if you reload the page is that will bold. That's the default styling of the strong tag. You could change that if you want to, but by default that makes the text bold.
Interesting.
And there's other tags that'll have these sort of special things, like EM stands for emphasis, and that'll be, by default, it'll be italics.
Ah,
But you can make the strong tag, like you can make it really big, you can make it have spaces in between, or something else that makes it stand out. But the point of an HTML page is to put your data in a certain structure that makes sense for the data. And so if you have something surrounded in a strong tag, it's sort of saying, this should be strongly emphasized. That's a little bit weird to say because there's also an emphasize tag. And those are also a little bit of holdouts from the original HTML, where the separation between style and content wasn't necessarily as focused on. And so back to my original point, the strong tag is also an inline tag, and so it's really it allows text to go basically in lines from left to right. Whereas if you were to instead use like a div tag or something else that's a block level element, and you could try that actually. You could change the strong to a div, and that will put it on a new line. And strong and div the block level elements, you can think of them as essentially like a block, and they don't really interact with the rest of the text very well. They tend to go on to the next line, and you tend to use them for things where you want to have a box around them, and maybe a lot of times you'll use them when you want to position something somewhere that's not sort of in the default position. So you can think of it like a block, whereas like inline elements are things that just sort of flow with everything else.
okay.
That probably doesn't make too much sense for now. You really, when you get started getting the examples, you'll see this more. But
Okay.
this is,
Now,
go ahead.
these different tags that we're doing here, can you have your own tag? So I'm guessing that when we get into the CSS, somewhere in there we'll define, when we have text highlighted as, or tagged as strong, we'll do whatever with it. We'll make it blue and amazing things, whatever. Can you like make up your own tags? Could you have like a Brian tag, and all the text that's tagged with Brian, is like super awesome?
Right. So that's actually a really good question. I think you technically can. It depends on what properties you put in to your HTML tag. You can actually put in properties that will say that this is a very strict page, and that if there's any tags that I don't normally expect to see, I'm going to throw an error. But you could also say that you want this page to be not processed very strictly. And you can also specify, I want this to be interpreted as HTML4, HTML5. Those are two of the newest versions of HTML
Okay.
that have been standardized and specified. So the way that you normally do that, if you want to be able to sort of label tags and use the CSS to refer to certain tags, is you'll use the ID and the class properties. So if you go into, let's go into the span tag, and after or just before the greater than, type a space, yeah, and say ID equals, and then put two double quotes. Yeah, and then inside type some word that'll identify this block, or I should say this tag, Brian. And then usually do it in all lowercase. So I would do that. Cool. And then if you go to the div, do the same thing, but instead of ID, say class, and choose some other word. Great. And then you can actually, if you do space, you can specify another one. That's actually somewhat important to know. So say space, and then specify another class name.
Um,
Awesome.
like
Fun.
that.
There you go. That's great. So the way that this would actually be used in CSS is you can refer to this ID and these classes in order to style something.
Hmm.
So let me actually, I think you can see my screen over here.
Yeah.
So if I were to refer to the Brian class, let's say this is a CSS file, I would say pound Brian, and then I put some brackets here, and I could say color red. And that's going to make the text color red. And I can say font weight bold, and that would make all of the text bold for where the ID is Brian. And the ID Brian can only be one place on the page. There's actually
Oh.
really nothing holding you back from actually putting it in multiple places, but it'll only choose one because it has to be unique.
Hmm.
And then the class is actually designed to be used in multiple places in the page. So you could have another tag that has the class awesome or the class fun, and you'd be styling both of those by specifying the CSS. So, and to refer to a class, instead of saying pound, you say dot,
Hmm.
and then say awesome. And the things that are awesome, have got to be color like pink, let's say, and they would, let's say, oh gosh, I don't remember how to make it italics, so let's just skip. Or actually, this is a div tag, so we'll say border 5px solid yellow. And so that would make a 5-pixel border around the div. And actually, we can just throw these in here. So if you go to the top of the page, and I think in the head, put in a style tag. Put it maybe below the title, just because title makes sense to go towards the top. And so normally you wouldn't do this. Normally you'd specify another CSS file that you would load in.
Okay.
But let's not do this for the moment. We'll just use a style tag to put some style directly in the page. And hit enter so we have a space. Usually we put style sort of in between the tags on their own lines, so it can be read a little bit better.
Okay.
So yeah, you just what you had before with the moving on to the next line.
Oh, with style on the next line?
Yeah, style on the next line, and then make some space in between those two tags so that you can put the actual style declarations in. Yeah, and say style either the span or the div to do something. So like choose one and we'll style it.
Like that?
Well, no, if you want to have, so like what do you want to style?
So my options are Brian or awesome. Is that right?
Or fun.
Or
Because fun
fun.
is also a class.
Let's try fun.
Fun, okay.
So dot fun.
Dot fun, exactly. And then space, squiggly brackets. And then hit enter, and we'll have some space to put these rules in. And
Cool.
so, do you want to make it a different color? Do you want to make it bold? I think it's a few.
Yeah. Let's make it blue. How do we do that?
Okay. So color : blue.
Just like that?
And save it, and then let's see what that does. And there's your text.
More fun already.
Yeah, exactly. And so, this is a way to, have this document that has, yeah, go ahead. You have this document that has your data in it, and the style or the CSS is going to determine how that looks to the user. And you could actually, if you wanted to, you could load different CSS files in different situations to make the page look different. There's a web page that I showed you after the show last week, CSS Zen Garden, which is all about that. It's basically there's the same HTML page all the time, but you switch out the style sheets and it can look very, very different.
Yeah, that was super cool.
Yeah. So let's save this, look at that. Well, I guess you just added some text, so that's not going to be very interesting necessarily. Go ahead and say OK. Then this is just the trial version of Sublime, so you'll get that occasionally. Yeah, there you go. And so let's also, so you get the, I think you sort of see the basic premise of styling.
Yeah.
Let's add an image in here, and I think after we're done with that, unless you have any questions, I think we can move on to Rails.
Okay.
So let's hit enter with this div, and let's give ourselves another line.
Let's see. We're
Your cursor is on line 14 there, so yeah, just use that and make another line. Good. And let's make an image tag, img, and then space src, which stands for source.
oh,
Yeah, go exactly like that.
like that.
Equals, and then 2 double quotes, and then end the tag with a greater than. And this is actually an example of a tag that you don't need to end. You don't need to put in an end image tag. There's a few of them that'll work like that. Technically, in older versions of like Internet Explorer and older browsers, you had to put a slash at the end of the tag just before the greater than in order to indicate that there would be no end tag. But you don't have to do that anymore. It's all browsers understand that there's only one image tag, and there's no end image tag.
Cool.
So we need an image. So let's go. It's usually you can link to a file on your desktop, but let's actually link to an image on the internet. So go and open up your browser, and then in a new tab, go to Google, and find some image somewhere. We can link to that image. There you go. There's
How about that?
Yeah, it's great. So get that.
Just save it to my desktop, or
Copy
Oh,
image
separate
location. And that's going to give us a URL. So you can close this tab now. And then inside those double quotes, paste this this location that you've copied.
Wow.
Whoa! Oh, that's a big one. Well, that's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just I think this is the Google URL as opposed to the original URL that it had found.
Gotcha.
So let's see what that does. Oh, you want to save it first?
How about that?
Yeah, yeah, very nice. And you can actually see image is also a block level element, which makes sense. It's a it's a raster image, which means it has a height and a width and pixels in it. And so it doesn't really flow very well with the rest of the text because it's big. And there's ways around that, and we can get to that later.
Okay.
But you can see that it is possible to just sort of stick an image in a page that easily.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay.
So, do you have any questions before we move on?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, this is good. That is a lot of link, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a lot of link. It's some computer generated hash. Oh, interesting. It's image data. It's not actually a URL, but this all of what you're seeing here is the actual content of the image.
Oh, really?
Which I didn't really expect, but that works fine. That's a little more advanced than I sort of wanted to get, but that's perfectly fine. So let's close this, and we can forget about this for now. And what we're going to do, so I wanted to cover that HTML page business. Yeah. It's good information, but I think it'll also give good context when working in Rails because you sort of get the idea of what Rails is trying to achieve and how it's working. So last week, again after the show, we had set up Rails on your computer using Rails installer, which if you search Google for Rails installer, you'll find that pretty easily. And we installed Ruby 1.9, which we had some problems last week using 1.8, so that should hopefully make things a little easier. So let's leave the browser open, open up a command prompt. I don't know if you have that in your start menu, or I know...
so just go to run?
Yeah,
or
run.
No?
And I type in CMD to get to the command prompt. Yeah, great. And so let's find a directory that you want to... I think you had a sites directory somewhere?
Sites. That sounds right. So is that...
I don't know if it's in here or not.
Is it...
Yeah, dir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that was. We could just create another Rails app right where we are.
Okay, that
Well,
works.
maybe it would be good to create a directory just to have our own sort of space for. So maybe say mkdir. I think that'll work. Space RFS. That'll be Ruby from scratch. That way we can have a place to play. Let's see if that works. Good. And say CD RFS. Good. And so there shouldn't be anything in there. So, and then type Rails space new space. So I think we had also talked before the show about doing, for educational purposes, a sort of Twitter clone, which I think will have some good examples that we can use, some sort of basic introductory stuff. But my wife, Amanda, actually had the idea of using, instead of having a bird, having a bee and calling it Buzzer. I'm sure the idea has been used somewhere, but I think it works pretty well. So let's call it Buzzer.
So Rails new buzzer.
And that'll create a directory called Buzzer with a default Rails application inside of it.
Sweet.
So you can see it's doing all these creations, and it's running bundle install, which is installing any of the default gems for the purposes of this application. And I think by default it includes the Rails gem and maybe something else. I'm not sure that it includes anything else. We can actually look at that in a minute. It just takes a minute. And maybe while we're waiting for this, oh, it's done. Good. See if you have a command subl. This is for Sublime Text. Then say it's not recognized. Okay, that's fine. So let's go back into Sublime Text, and you should be able to open this directory in order to open it as a project. Yeah, documents and settings.
Oh, no.
There we go. Excellent. And hopefully you can say, I think you can just say open from here. No. Did you choose, I think it went by a little kind of fast, but there's like an open file and an open directory maybe? Different options from the file menu?
Oh, I'm sorry. Where was that?
So, well, what happens, by the way, when you were right-clicking on that, try clicking on select, see what that does. No, okay, that's not what we want. So yeah, close this window, go to the file menu, and open folder. I don't know if you chose open file. There we go. That should work better, I think. Excellent. Okay, now we have a new window. Maybe you can close the window behind just to save a little memory and all that. And you see we have a directory structure here on the side. And I'll give a rundown of some of the more important directories here. So there's the app directory, which actually open that up. This is sort of the main directory where a lot of our code will go. And there's assets, which is CSS style sheets. It's JavaScript files. It's also images, I believe, and other sorts of things that you'd load into the page. And then there's controllers. The next three that are really important are controllers, models, and views. Rails uses a structure that's popular in the computer science world called model view controller. And the idea behind that, as it's implemented in Rails, it can be a little abstract, I think, otherwise. But in Rails, what it essentially means is that you have models, which are databases generally, almost always. They're database tables. But it could also be data sources like some web service providing data, or it could really be any place that's providing data that you need to access. You'll generally create a model for it and then access it through that model. The views are essentially the structure of the page. So all of the HTML stuff is going to go into those views. The controllers are going to give us a place where the request comes in through a URL, and the controller takes that request in, and it does some figuring. Like it might go to a model and get some data. It might do a couple things. Usually it tries not to do too much. And then it will choose a view to render, which it will be returned to the browser. This is all just to give you a general idea. It's probably not going to make too much sense just yet, but that's sort of the important thing. We have mailers, which if you want to send mail, you can use mailers. We have helpers, which is if you want to define methods off to the side, which could be helpful for reuse. Those can be put there, but that's not so important for the moment. Another one that's going to be important, there's a DB folder down below. That has our DB configuration. We don't have to mess with that just yet. It actually probably has a default configuration in there to start. And that's all mentioned for the moment. Actually, also click on the gem file down below, just so we can get a quick peek at that.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, so that includes a number of things. So it looks like we're using Rails 4.0 release candidate 2, which is interesting. I didn't expect that to be the case with Rails installer, because Rails installer normally it gives you things like that. I would expect to give you a stable release, whereas release candidate is not necessarily stable. But if we wanted to use a different version of Rails, we could just change this in here and run bundle install, and then all of a sudden now we're using a different version of Rails. And it also manages what versions of all these different gems that we use. So there's a SQLite 3 gem, Sass Rails, which is Sass is a way to, it's a nicer way to do CSS essentially. It'll compile its own very CSS-like language into CSS, and it has a lot of advantages. Uglifier is a gem that takes your JavaScript files and compresses them. It's called Uglifier because you can't read the file after it's done with it. But
Okay.
it's nice because when you're putting up files on web pages, it's good to have them compressed because it's going to be a smaller file that needs to be downloaded, and so your page will respond a little bit quicker.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Coffee Rails is using CoffeeScript, which is kind of like Sass. It's a JavaScript-like language that compiles into JavaScript, which has a lot of nice things that are associated with it. And there's some other things here. I don't need to get too deeply into some of these other things, but suffice to say, they won't get in your way, and they'll be there when you need them. So that's
Very
really
nice.
Yeah. One of the things I'll also point out, you actually haven't opened this file, which is perfectly fine. It's one of the things I like about Sublime is that as you click on different files, it'll show them to you, and if you double click, it'll actually open it. So that's a convenient sort of feature.
Cool.
So let's get into creating the basic, I think, data structures for Buzzer, and maybe creating a basic web page and see what we can come up with. So open up models. I'm assuming there's nothing in there. Yeah. Concerns, which is, that's where you generally put mix-ins for models. We don't have to worry about that for the moment. But that's all fine. So so let's run a generator for Rails, which will allow us to create tables in the database. And actually, if you go down to the DB folder, this is the other thing I should probably cover. Seeds. There's no database configuration file. That's probably fine. It'll probably create it for us. So there's three different sort of databases that you can use with Rails out of the box. There's MySQL, which is very popular. I'm not a big fan. There's PostgreSQL, which is also very nice. Both of those are free and open source.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also something that you have to install as a server before you can really use them.
Okay.
And then the other one is called SQLite, which is particularly nice for sort of getting your app up and running in the first place.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be installed and set up as a server. It just runs as files on your computer that are accessed directly through let's call it an adapter through Rails. So that's what we'll start with, and we can move on to other things if we really need to, but we probably will need to for a long time. So let's go to back to the command line, and we're going to use Rails generators, which is Rails has a lot of abilities to generate things out of the box.
Nice.
And so I think I'm going to go, I'm just going to do a little bit of research on my own computer so you can check this out while I do this.
Mm-hmm.
Rails generators. I haven't used generators for a long time, so I'm just going to familiarize myself with them. You can also create your own Rails generators, but that's really more advanced stuff. So Rails generator. I know you can create models, you can create controllers, you can create migrations. And migrations are something that allow you to make, to enact a database change. So if you want to create a table, if you want to add or remove a column, change whether it's an integer or a string, those sorts of things in the database, you'd have a migration for that. Let's stick with the basic ones. I know there's one to create scaffolding that I've used in a long time ago, but let's start with just creating a model. So on the command line, we want to type Rails generate, or you can actually just do G. It's kind of convenient like that, and then space model.
Oh,
Yeah,
I got excited,
okay.
Brian.
It's okay. It sees that it's not complete, and so it's just like, okay, I won't do anything. Model.
Model.
And then space, and then we want to type the name of the model. So that'll be, let's say, for Twitter they use tweets. So for buzzer, I assume we're going to have buzzes. So let's say buzz is the model. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And buzzes are going to have, by default, for models, it'll create an ID column for us because all the active record is the way that you create models by default in Rails. And so by default that gives us an ID column, and so we'll let it do that. But we probably want to have a column for the content of the buzz. So let's say space content, and the way to specify that, let's just say string, :string.
Like that?
Yep, that's great. And then I'm trying to think of what else might go in this table, or if it's just going to be contents. Oh, probably a user ID. So let's have that space user ID : integer. Maybe let's call it, instead of calling it user ID, let's call it creator ID. That's just going to be a little bit clearer. And let's do creator _ ID. That's the convention that Rails generally goes by.
Okay.
Integer. And actually, once we're done, let's just hit enter, because we don't have to worry too much about, if we forgot something, we can always add a migration to add it later.
Okay.
So let's just go with this. This is going to create a few files for us, I believe. Hit maximize on this window, because I'm not sure what it just The error is probably towards the top. What did it say? Rails generate. No, that's the first generate command. It's down a little bit further. Rails new. It's thinking that you just, like, it's giving the sort of command that you type if you just type Rails. Maybe just double check this. Rails generate model name. Okay. And you're in, oh, I think I know what the problem is. Go down to the bottom. I think you need to be in the buzzer directory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. It realizes that you're not in a Rails application, so it didn't actually do anything.
Okay, so I go to CD buzzer.
Yep, that's right. And then just hit up a couple times. I think that should get you back to that first command. There you go.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Hit enter, and that will, hopefully we'll get those files created. That was a good demonstration for our audience that you need to be in your Rails app in order for things to work.
So I'm a little sketchy on what's happening here. So are we creating a table?
Yes. So we're essentially creating a file. We're creating a migration, which will create a table, and that's a little indirect. And I'll explain why. The reason that we're doing that is because you'll often have multiple environments that you work in with Rails. So you'll have your development environment, which has your development database. But then when you go to deploy that to production, you'll also have a production environment with a production database, which is separate.
Oh.
And so it's important to have a file which defines how your database changes over time.
Okay.
Because you can make that change to the database, but then you have to remember to make that same change to your production environment. And if you forget to do that, then your application doesn't work, and you're scrambling around. And if you have like 5 different migrations, then or 5 different like changes you need to make, then it's going to be just a nightmare.
Okay.
And
So the migration is that list of changes that you made to your development database?
It's a list of changes that you need to make to the database in order for the code to work.
Okay.
So the development database, definitely, and also the production database. Sometimes in some workshops, there'll be, in some offices, there'll be a staging environment as well, which is sort of where you put your code out to test it out before you actually put it into production. So that'll have a database as well. If you run tests, there'll be a test database as well, which is separate. So it just makes a lot of sense to have some sort of paper trail that says this is how you make changes to the database in order to get it to work properly.
I gotcha. Now, so you make them in your development database, and then it works well in development, and you're going to make them in your production database. Do you have to physically make those same changes, or can you just kind of automatically apply those code changes, or how does that work?
So you essentially just automatically apply them by running your migrations. And in the database, there'll be a record of what migrations have been run so far.
Okay.
And so it just is like, okay, I've run these migrations, now I just need to run these 2 migrations, and then it'll make the changes it needs to make. Cool. So it's nice because you don't have to think about it at all. It just works.
I like it just works. That sounds really good.
Totally. As you get into more advanced things, you do start to have to think about your migrations a little bit more. And especially at my current job, we have a very, very large website which has lots and lots of users that can't really experience any downtime.
That would be bad.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes, or it can't experience a lot of downtime. So like you have to pay attention to like whether your migrations are going to cause 5 seconds of downtime or 5 minutes of downtime. And so that can get a little more difficult. But at this scale, that's not a problem in any way whatsoever.
Okay.
So let's have a look at this migration because it probably won't clarify things, but it'll be good to have a look at it first. And then we can run it. And then we can look at the database to sort of get an idea of what we've done. So if you go into your Sublime and open up, you can see that this migration is under db migrate. So, and Sublime will open that up. There's our migration. So in older versions of Rails, and this is actually still supported, you'll have an up part of your migration and a down part of your migration. And the up part of your migration will define like things like if you're creating a table, it says how you create the table. And the down part of your migration will specify, if you're going backwards, essentially, sometimes you need to go backwards. It'll specify, oh, you need to remove the table, and that's pretty simple down migration. Here, there's a change method, and this essentially allows you to do both. Like you use the create table method, and just by virtue of the fact that it knows what the reverse of create table is, you only need to define one thing. You don't need to define both, because it is possible to write an up migration and then write a down migration that doesn't do the right thing to go down. You might create an up migration that creates a table and a down migration that simply removes a column. That's sort of an extreme example, but there's more subtle ways than that can break, and that can get really frustrating. So it's really nice to have sort of one method that knows how to go both up and down.
Nice.
Yeah. And so here you can see how migrations are specified. You say create table, you say the table name. You have this object you're given called T, and you can call this is really kind of abstract. This is not particularly normal Ruby syntax, but it's using what's called a DSL, or domain specific language syntax. And we don't need to get into that too much, but basically this is just saying you're creating a table called buzzes. It has a string column called content. It has an integer column called creator ID, and it also has timestamps. This is another thing in Rails, is that your tables by default will have an updated at column and a created at column.
Nice.
And yeah, Rails will automatically fill those values out for you, so you don't have to think about them. They just exist, and it'll say when it was created, and then anytime you make a change, it'll update the updated at.
And is that data that you can? Stupid question, I know, but that's data that you can kind of get back to. So if I want to go back and look through a record of changes to the database, I can see, hey, this was changed at such and so a time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You really just have to call updated at or created at, and you can get it. But of course, you can just go look in your database and see it there as well. So we'll get to that, because that's definitely good stuff. So, and this is also, it doesn't say it here, but it creates an ID in the table as well, which is going to be an integer, and it's also going to be the primary index on the table. And that you can say, if you don't want an ID, you can say that in your migration, but by default, it just, without even saying it, it just creates an ID column.
Okay.
So let's actually try to run this and see what we get, because there's no database configuration, so I'm wondering actually what will happen. What's under config? I'm just making sure they didn't move it or something. Under the config directory in your Sublime, yeah. Config. Oh, yeah. I think this is where it's been for the longest time. I just forgot. So database.yaml is what we want to look at. And YAML is a sort of configuration format that is easy for humans to read. And you can see here everything is set up. So again, this is the Rails convention over configuration, meaning it should work out of the box unless you want to change something.
Nice.
So you can see here there's a development environment, there's a test environment, there's a production environment, and they all have a lot of the default values that you should have when you're configuring SQLite 3 for these things.
Okay, now, so the whole SQLite thing, right? So we didn't have to install that or do anything, that just kind of is available with it?
We normally, actually, you have to install SQLite, but my guess is that Rails installer did that for us. Because it's going to be a separate sort of software and bit of library that's going to be on your computer. And there's going to be a gem that interacts with SQLite as well. But Rails, so Bundler would have taken care of the gem, but Rails installer probably installed SQLite 3 for us. So that should be nice. I would be very surprised actually if it didn't do that.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so you can see these are actually where it says database. Those are actually just file paths. So there's gonna be a file called development.sqlite3 under our DB folder, and it's not there right now. But I think as soon as we actually try to do anything with the database, it's going to create that. So let's go into the console and we'll run our migration, and we'll see if it creates that file, and we'll see what we can see from that.
Okay. So wait, I'm sorry. So what do I do?
Go to your console, the DOS console. And it hasn't come up for me yet. There we go. And type rake space db:migrate. And again, it's perfectly understandable that there's a lot going on that you don't understand just yet.
Okay.
But as long as you're getting the general concept of what we're doing, that we're creating a table, that there's different environments, that sort of thing, that's sort of the important thing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see what this does. There we go. So I said create table. That took a very short amount of time. And yeah, so I think if you go back into Sublime, look under the DB directory. I wouldn't open up the file, but there should be a development file underneath db development.sql lite 3. So no need to open that up, but that is the file, so that's great. And so there's two things that we can do if we want to look at this table. The first thing, actually go back to your console and type in SQLite tab.
Is it SQL ITE?
ITE, yeah, that's right.
Like that?
Mm-hmm. Hit tab just to see it, because I think it'll autocomplete for you. It might, because the command I think is SQLite 3 is my guess. Does tab do anything?
Nope.
Okay, what if you hit enter? No? Okay, try going up and putting a 3 at the end of it. And see if that does anything. Okay, great. So .exit, I think will get you out of here. So this is like, I don't know if you've worked with any consoles for SQL, like a MySQL console or a Microsoft SQL console or things like that.
No, not really, no.
Okay, well it's a place where you can execute SQL statements directly to look at your database.
Really? Very nice.
That's essentially what we're doing here. So if you do SQLite 3 and then space db/development db for database.
Sorry.
Yep. And then you might actually be able to tab complete this here. I don't know. No. Okay.
Nope.
That's fine. Development.SQLite 3, I think, was what it was called.
Look good?
Yeah, that looks good.
Enter?
Yep, hit enter. Great. So I think it's opened up the file, and it's sort of like connecting to the database. So you can execute SQL commands. So try saying select asterisks from buzzes.
Cool. So we shouldn't have too much in here yet, right?
Yeah, we shouldn't have any rows in here. You need a semicolon at the end. It's actually, your command is still going on, so that's why it's confused, is because you see that ... there?
Yep.
Yeah, so go ahead and hit that again. You're fine with that. So that, I think, the way that SQLite works, it doesn't show a header or anything. So try DESC, which stands for describe, space buzzes. And then you need a semicolon. So you just type the semicolon there, and it'll...
Here?
Yep. Ideally, you do it on the same line, but... okay, so I don't know actually how to... SQLite 3 describe table. What is the syntax for that? You'll learn if you do much programming that you'll spend a lot of time on Google. Try... Okay, .schema buzzes, space buzzes. And I don't think you need a semicolon after this, because this is a specific SQLite command.
Just like that?
Yep, just like that. Great. So this is saying create. This is showing you what command it ran in order to create the table. Create table buzzes. It's got an ID column. It's got content column, creator ID column specifically, created at and updated at. Wonderful. So we've seen that sort of from the horse's mouth, from SQLite, that it created that table. So if we exit out of here, You can also get back into this, by the way, and whatever database you want to use by typing Rails space DB, and that will, you don't have to type that now, but we're actually type it now. Why not? Rails space DB. That will take you into the database console for SQLite. So you can see here, and you've gone into the development environment console. So you didn't have to type SQLite 3 space DB slash development.SQLite 3, which is nice. But also, if you're working with MySQL, if you're working with Postgres, you could just type Rails DB, and that'll connect to the database for you, which is convenient.
Cool.
So do a .exit out of here, because we don't need to be in here. And we'll use one of my favorite things in the world, the Rails console. So type Rails space C. You can also, if you want to be complete, you could type Rails space console, but I generally type Rails space C. And this will take us into an interactive Ruby console, which is in our Rails environment. And so if we type in capital B, UZZ, this is going to be our buzz model, so hit enter. And so this is the buzz class that it's telling us about. And Active Record gives us this sort of ability to see that the buzz table has an ID column, content, creator ID, on and on. We actually get this. I should show you where this comes from. If you go back to Sublime, and you go into, you have app open, so go into models, and there's you can actually see the buzz.rb there.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Buzz.rb. So you see we have, we've created a Ruby class here by saying class buzz.
So what does a class mean in this case?
So in this case, the class is sort of an interface to the database.
Okay.
In general programming / Ruby terms, a class is an encapsulation of an idea, I think is maybe a good way to say it.
Okay.
Is an encapsulation of an idea that could be instantiated. So that could be like a typical example is like a user. And all the logic is contained within the class definition, and you can instantiate a user object. This is sort of basic object-oriented programming concepts. And it matches very well with how Active Record uses classes, as sort of the class defines how the table works, and instances of the class represent rows of the table. And it's actually it might be good to sort of see a demonstration of this to understand it better. But you can see here, this is a class. It's just a Ruby class, but it inherits from another class called Active Record Base. And that gives it a lot of power and functionality.
Cool.
So that's all we'll release there for the moment. If we go back into the console, we're now in the Rails console. So if you say like b equals buzz.new, and buzz in this case is capital B, because we're dealing with a class. The variable is going to be lowercase b, and then the class is uppercase.
Like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that, and hit enter. And so this gives us an object. It only exists in memory so far. It hasn't been put into the database.
Oh.
And so, but it's sort of a representation of what a row would be in the database.
Mm-hmm.
So what we can do is we can say b.content equals, and then we say some string in Ruby. So specify whatever string you want with quotes around it. Okay. And then just hit enter. Okay. And now if you just type B, the Ruby console will show the object to you, and so you can see now the content is, "Hey Brian, what's up?"
Okay.
And so,
Now,
go ahead.
did that enter that into our table?
No, it
No.
didn't.
So that's just we defined a variable and gave it that string.
Right. Well, we defined a variable b, which
Yep.
which is holding a buzz object, and we've assigned to its content property.
Yep.
Its attribute actually is the terminology for active record. Its content attribute, we've assigned a string to it, and then we can do the same thing with creator ID. For now, let's assign that the ID 1.
Okay. So, um, so we just come up with any other variable like C in this case, or
Well, no, you'd still use b. So you
oh
could say like b dot creator ID.
oh I'm sorry. So content was one of the fields in our table.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So B represents one record, and these are the dot content dot creator ID. Okay.
Yeah, it's a record that hasn't been inserted yet.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Is it possible for you to make the console just a little bit higher? I think it's cutting off just a little bit of the. Yeah, that's better. Awesome. Yeah, and if you just hit enter there, that's going to assign 1 as the creator ID. And then if you look at B again, but just by typing B, you'll see that the creator ID is assigned. But you can see that the ID is nil. That's one way to tell that the record hasn't been put in yet.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. And there's another one that's active record persisted. So if you say b dot persisted ?
Like that.
Hit enter. That's saying false. And you may or may not know the word persisted in database terminology means that it's been put into the database.
Oh, no.
And so this is saying it hasn't been put into the database. So if we want to do that, all we need to do is say b.save. And now you can see it's actually not outputting just right. There's a lot of color characters that are supposed to be outputting here to make it output in different colors. But you can essentially see there's an insert into buzzes. Oh, excuse me, hiccups. It's running an SQL statement in the background. It's saying insert into buzzes, content created at, all these things, and then it's specifying some values of what the content is going to be, what the created at is going to be, the creator ID, on and on. And so now, if you just say B again, we should see B now has an ID, which is 1. And if we say b.persisted ? You can actually hit up until you get to that point. Yep. Enter again. And that's true. It is persisted. And you can see it put in an updated at and a created at for us.
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry about that. And it's also kind of cool. You can see that it put in a UTC timestamp. So it supports different time zones. So if you wanted to output the time zone in Eastern time or Pacific time or whatever time you want, it's storing it in a standardized way in the database, which is UTC time.
So UTC?
Universal Time Code. It's very similar to GMT, which is
Greenwich
London
Mean
time.
Time.
Greenwich Mean Time, exactly. It's I think I don't know the exact definition of it, but it doesn't support daylight savings time, I think, and so it's a way of having a standardized time across the world, and it's very common in programming.
Cool. So no, I'm sorry. So how do we know that it's UTC aside from it's obviously a different time than what my system clock is saying?
Yeah, totally. So that's a good question because I told you.
Okay, gotcha.
Essentially, it's just a fact I happen to know. Like if you say b.updated at, let's see what it does. I'm guessing it'll give you, because what it's doing there. Well, go ahead and say b.updated at and
like that
with an underscore before the at.
Question mark?
No, just as is.
UTC.
UTC. Yeah. So it's giving you an object. In this case, if you actually go up and say dot class.
Like that?
Mm-hmm. Right. So when you call updated at, it's giving you an active support time with zone object. Active support time with zone is another class that's provided by the Rails framework. And this is an instantiation of that class, which is basically a time, but it supports time zones. So you could do something to turn this into, Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time or whatever. And so we don't have to get into that, but just to give you an idea of what's there. So we could go in and we could look at the buzzes table through the SQLite console, and we'd see that there's a record there. I don't know that's necessary, but I can show you how you can access that through Active Record.
Okay.
So we'll say buzz dot all with a capital B because we're referring to the class in this case. Yep. And so this is going to give you all of the objects in the database. And in this case, it's giving you an array with just one object in it, which is that one buzz.
Okay. Now, if this was actually Twitter, and we hit, Twitter, say, whatever, twitter.all.
Tweet.all, yeah.
Would that just be a bad thing?
That would be a bad idea, yes.
Okay.
That would be a very bad idea. You generally want to access things in a more constrained way.
Okay.
One example of that is if we were to say, go up, and instead of saying all, say find, and find is a method, so pass the argument of 1 to it.
So equals 1?
No, you could either have parentheses or you don't have parentheses. You can just say space 1. Either one is fine in Ruby.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so now you've found a particular object with the ID of 1. And so that's how you can reference a particular object if you happen to know its ID. Another way to access things if you were to say buzz.where, and then parenthesis, colon, creator ID, no greater than. Oh, I said creator ID.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's just I'm hearing an echo, but I think it's probably just. And then say space equals greater than, and then space 1, and then end the parenthesis, and hit enter. And this gives us an array of, essentially an array, it's actually technically an active record relation. We don't have to get into that for the moment. But essentially gives us an array of all buzz objects where the creator ID is 1. So if I wanted to see all of your buzzes or of all of my buzzes, I could do it this way.
Nice.
Yeah. So this gives us a general idea. We've created the table. It's working. That's great. Let's actually create a web page maybe that we can create and look at buzzes.
Sweet.
Let's see what time it is. I have some time if you have some time.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so let's go back into Sublime, and let's see if we have anything under controllers, under app controllers. So we have an application controller. An application controller is generally what everything, all of our controllers are going to inherit from, but it gives us the ability to supply common behavior between all of our controllers. We don't have to worry about that too much for the moment.
Cool.
Let's go to the console, and we'll say exit to get out of that Rails console. We'll still be in the DOS console, the Windows console. Not .exit. That's for SQLite. That can be confusing.
Oh, sorry.
Just exit.
Just regular old exit.
Mm-hmm. And type Rails space G space controller. So now we're going to generate a controller. And say space buzz. We'll create a buzz controller. And hit enter. This is going to generate a controller file for us, maybe something else, but I think just a controller. Oh, yeah, I created some other things. So I created a directory under the views. So we can create, usually there's a very standardized way of having controllers and views, and you generally have a directory under views. So in this case, there's a buzz controller and there's a buzz directory under views, which is where we'll put various view files, which will have the HTML templates. But it also created some test files, some helper files, some asset files, which is actually really convenient. There's the buzz.js.coffee and buzz.css.scss. So that's great. And one of the other things is that we could, I believe we can just use JavaScript and CSS syntax inside of our CoffeeScript and Sass files. We don't necessarily need to get into CoffeeScript and Sass for the moment. May or may not be. I don't know if we want to get into CoffeeScript and Sass because that's. I feel like it's important to understand the base technologies first before you sort of move on to the things that help you with them.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
Cool. So, but we also maybe don't have to worry about that too much for the moment. Let's go back into Sublime and open up the Buzz controller and double click on it so it'll sort of stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's create an action. So Buzz controller. This is just Rails does a lot of things with classes to sort of. I mean, classes are really all you can really do in Ruby is define classes and modules and do things with them. But in the case of controllers, a class represents a group of potential actions that are people coming into your website and requesting something. So let's say we're going to have a page that people are going to come to, and it's going to have a form where they can type in a buzz, and it's going to be created by them. So what we'll do is fill in that space you have in there and give us just an extra line and say def, because we're going to define a method inside of this controller.
Okay.
But it's really going to be, it's what's called an action in the terms of controllers. And say def new. Just call it new. Or let's actually call it form. I'm going actually back and forth. Let's say put new underscore, so it's like new form. Very indecisive, but I think this is good. So say new form, hit enter, put an end to end the function. And we don't actually need anything particularly here at the moment. Just I don't even think we need to define that, but it's good to sort of say that things get defined in here when you want to specify functionality. So we'll leave that for the moment. So save that. Okay. And then open up under the views directory, app views. There's the buzz directory, and that doesn't have anything in it. So right click on that and say new file. And let's actually save this before we fill it out.
Just save?
Just save, and it'll ask us what we want to call it. So let's call it new underscore form. And I think the current convention is, well, it depends on what you want to use. The default sort of thing to use is ERB. So let's say .html.erb.
So what is ERB?
So ERB is, what does it stand for? I don't know what it stands for. The RB part is Ruby, but I don't know what the E stands for. But essentially, ERB allows you to have like an HTML page, but it can be dynamic. You can put in variables and do loops.
Okay,
and,
so it's not. We're saying it's not a static page. It's a dynamic page.
Right. That's
kind
the
of
idea.
Thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Save.
Save. And actually, I don't know that this necessarily needs to be an ERB file because it's just going to be a basic form. But for the moment, let's make it an ERB file. It doesn't really hurt anything. The other thing that I should also probably point out, you see under views where there's a layouts directory?
Yes.
So let's go into there and see the application.html.erb.
Yeah.
So you can see here there's an doc type, We didn't talk about that. We'll not worry about that for the moment. But there's an HTML tag, a head tag. We talked about all those. There's a title tag. There's you can see here the less than percent equals. This is what ERB is doing. Is it's allowing you to insert things into the document. And so style sheet link tag is actually a Ruby method that's being called, and it's returning some data which is being put into the page. And so this is actually just a helper that allows us to put a style sheet or a JavaScript file into our page without having to worry so much, without having to remember, wait, what was that tag that I had to put into the HTML page? Because there's a certain format that you have to use to put a style sheet or a JavaScript file into the page. And this just means you don't have to remember that. It just calls a method and you give it the file name and it'll put it in there for you. So, and then there's also the CSRF meta tags. That's a security thing that it's putting into the page for you so that your page is more secure. It's just a handy little thing. So this is one of the really nice things about convention over configuration as a concept is that you can make things secure by default without having to worry about them too much.
Cool.
So, yeah. And you can see there in the body that we're inserting something else. We're calling the yield method. And yield is actually kind of a special method in Ruby. And essentially what this is doing is it's allowing you to specify on a per action basis in the different controllers what you want to put into the body tag. So everything around the yield is always going to be the same on every single page, but you're going to change what goes into the body tag.
Okay.
And this is also handy if you want to always have like a menu bar at the top of your page or something.
Yeah.
You can put it in your layout, and then you can you won't have to repeat that on every single page that you're defining.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just a way of there's a concept in Ruby called dry, don't repeat yourself, which is basically the idea is if you're copying and pasting code, you're probably doing something wrong.
Okay.
So not always necessarily, but like 99% of the time, you're probably doing something wrong if you're copying and pasting code. So I just wanted to show you this so that you can know where the full HTML page is coming from. So we can go back to the new form.html.
Is that in View?
It is in Views. You also have it open in your tab there. So either way, it's fine. And so here, you don't have to specify all that body stuff anymore. You could just start off with what's going to be in the body tag, which is great. So let's start off with a form tag. Yeah, and this is actually nice. Now that we've saved it as an HTML page that the Sublime recognizes it as, it'll give you suggestions on things that you could fill out because it knows what should go into an HTML page.
Nice.
So that's handy. Let's put that on another line so that we can fill inside of this. And we'll make a text area tag.
Text area?
Text area, yep. Text area is another tag that you don't have to have a... actually, you do want to have an end tag. That's good. It filled out the end tag for you because that can be kind of tedious.
Yeah, that's nice.
And so let's save this and see what we have. So you'll need to start up your server. So go back into your Rails console and say Rails space S. And this will start up our Rails server for us. And you'll go into your browser. And do what we did last week, which is to go to localhost :3000. I actually missed a step here. So this is our Rails app. We can see that it's running. That's great. So let's go into I actually forgot a step here. If we go back into Sublime, we have to set up what's called a route.
Okay.
So if we go to config, and this is getting lots of things are open, but if you go under config, there is routes.rb. And there's a lot of sort of examples of things that you could potentially do in here. We don't have to worry about those too much for the moment. the sort of basic one, if you see on line 9, that's the sort of thing that we want to do. So let's create a space after line 9. We can create a route for ourselves. So say get space, and then the single quote, buzz. Let's call it buzz. And this is going to be where you can go is to your host name, which in this case is localhost 3000, but on production it might be like buzzer.com. And then you can go to /buzz, and that'll take you to the new form action. And so we have to fill this out in order to make it go to that new form action. If you go to the end of the line, and you can see there's an equals greater than, so say space equals greater than space, and put a space, and then single quote, and then buzz, this is going to refer to the buzz controller, and then pound, like you see there, and then new underscore form. And so, again, what this is saying is if you go to /buzz, you get taken to the buzz controller's new form action. And by default, the buzz controller's new form action, like you just defined an empty method, so it's just going to render that new form HTML page. So there's a lot of default stuff going on. So if you save this, and now go back to your browser, and then go to, at the end of your URL, put /buzz. Yeah. And it's connecting. It's taking a minute. Usually it's a little faster than this. I wonder if you have anything else running on your computer.
I don't know.
Also open up, while we're waiting for this, open up the DOS prompt, and we'll see if it's processing this request. Right, so it is, you can see that it is going to /buzz. Before you went a couple times to slash. Ah, there we go. Oh, you know what, it's probably pre-compiling your assets, which is, you don't have to worry about, but that actually I think just happens just once until you change your files. But you can see it took 38.6 seconds essentially in the view. If you go back again and reload it, it should be faster, I think. Let me try that out. Yeah, so that was much faster. You can see here that there's a text field. So that's the text area tag that we specified. And actually, one thing that's handy, I think if you go into Firefox and right-click on the text area and inspect element, you get this sort of debugging functionality that comes with Firefox.
Wow.
And a lot of browsers have it now, but you can see inside the body there's a form, and inside the form there's a text area. And this allows you to sort of inspect your page in a more dynamic way, which is pretty handy.
Very cool.
So go ahead and you can close this because we don't quite need this for the moment. Or I meant close the debugger. We'll need the browser, I think, still. So localhost 3000 buzz. Excellent. Awesome. So so this is a text area. Now if we go back to Sublime, we have the route, and that we can tell that that's working, so that's great. So we'll go back. Let's go back to new form, and we have the text area. So on the next line, make a space. Not inside the text area, but just after the text area. Yeah, just hit enter there. That's perfect. And let's make an input tag. And space, put a space just before that greater than there. Yeah, and say type equals submit. You don't need to put quotes around it. Just say type equals submit. And no spaces. Maybe you do need to have quotes around it. Let's put quotes around it to be safe.
Around type or around submit or
around
both?
submit. So, and I should have probably explain with tags in HTML, they can have I don't know if they're called properties or attributes, but this is a type property, and you're giving it the value submit. And here there's the input tag, and you can do multiple things with the input tag. You can have, in this case, it's a submit tag, which is going to give you a button to submit the form. But you can also have, instead of the text area, you can just have an individual one-line input field,
Okay.
and that's type equals text. And I think there's you can have I think you can have input type equals radio, which has radio buttons, and you can also have type equals checkbox, which is like checkboxes. We don't have to worry about that for the moment. So you can go ahead and end this tag. And actually, sorry, don't end the tag. Add another property, which is value.
So just quotes again.
You want to do a space.
Space. Okay.
With no quotes for the value. Yeah. And so value equals, and then in double quotes, say buzz this. Let's say, whatever this is what we want the button to say.
Okay.
Say exclamation point to be enthusiastic about it. And then
yeah, we don't want any half-hearted buzzes coming in.
Exactly.
That's not going to work.
No, we want this to be a fast-rising social network. So we can end it there, put a greater than, and save the page, and we'll load it again, see what we got.
Nice.
Excellent. Buzz this. So now, if you put something in the field, and click on buzz this when you've done that. Now that just submitted and came back. Oh, actually, that wouldn't have done anything, I think.
Okay.
Because the form, we didn't specify an action for our form. But let's see what happened if you go to the console, the DOS prompt. We'll see what the Rails application actually did in that case. Did it do anything? Buzz, new form. No, it didn't submit what. So that's fine. So let's go back into Sublime, and we need to specify an action in the form. So in the form tag, we want to have a property that says action.
Like here?
And say equals, and then in quotes put /buzz. And so what this is going to do is it's going to say, I want you to take what the person has filled out in this form and submit it to the /buzz URL. And that seems a little bit weird because we've already used the /buzz URL. But what we're going to do is put another property into the form tag that is, what is it called? Sorry. I actually might have gotten this wrong. HTML form tag. I think it's actually action is going to be post here. But let me just verify. Form. Yeah. Okay. Form, action, method. That's what we want. So I was right. So say method equals. Oh no, that's all perfect. What you had, yeah. So yeah, method equals no spaces.
I love those spaces.
Yeah. Double quotes and put in there post in all caps.
Post? Okay.
I don't think that all caps matters, but it's sort of convention, I guess. It's not too important, but and then say save that. And so there's three main ways that you can. Well, so there's two main ways I should say that you can access URLs. You can access them via get, or you can access them via post.
Okay.
And actually, for the purposes of Rails, there's actually two more. There's put and there's post. Actually, I think is a new one. Sorry, no, post is there, put, and something else. I have to look it up. I don't quite remember.
Okay.
But post is essentially, when you say get to a URL, you're saying, get me the data for this resource.
Okay.
Because that's what a URL represents, is a resource.
Gotcha.
And when you say post, what it means is that I want to post a new thing to this resource. I want to input some data there.
Okay.
And so that's why we're saying post.
Print statement on an older language, maybe.
It's sort of more like saving to a database. Actually, the various actions in the HTTP specification, the get and the post and the put, they all map to. You may have heard of the 4 different actions that you have with databases that you could do. You could do a select, which maps to get. You could do an insert, which maps to post. Mm-hmm. You could do an update, which matches to a put, I think. And you could do a delete, which actually that's the other action in HTTP is delete. So, but there's 4 actions. They're called CRUD: create, remove, update, and delete.
Okay.
That's what the term CRUD means. And so HTTP sort of specifies the same sort of thing. It sort of gives you this interface so that a URL is acting sort of like a database. And so you could either get data out of a particular resource, you can put it, you could post it, which maps to update and insert, and then you can delete it as well, if you're authenticated. So we've said that we want to submit this to the /buzz, but we want it to go to the post method. So we need to go into the route, and we need to define another route that will allow us to take this in. So we'll open that up. It's that tab there on the right. And on a new line, instead of saying get, we're going to say post. And you want to keep that, yeah. And so we're going to post again to Buzz. Same there. And then we're going to redirect that to the Buzz controller still. Yeah, Sublime can autocorrect sometimes a little too much.
Wait, I'm sorry. What do we do here?
So we're going to do the same thing with the equals greater than, and we're going to specify the Buzz controller, but we're going to specify a different action in the Buzz controller. So we're going to say Buzz pound. Excuse me, and we'll say create is the standard sort of way in Rails, is when you want to put something, when you want to post new data, you send it to the create action. And so we'll save this. And that's fine. And then we'll go to the Buzz controller, which is, another tab there, great. And we'll create a new action called create. So that's just defining another method. And then end that. And we're going to want to specify more. We're actually going to want to put something in this create action in a minute, but let's save this, and you can buzz again through your browser, and we'll see what happens in the console when you try to do that. Awesome. Buzz this. And so let's go to the console and see if Rails interpreted that. The most recent buzz was a get. Okay, so I don't know exactly what's going on here. So let's go back to the browser and go to Tools, the Tools menu, and Web Developer, and choose Network. And we're actually going to see what happens when you submit this page. So let's reload the page just to get that information. And you can see when you load this page, it does the initial get, which is getting the HTML from the page. And that takes 63 milliseconds, so that's very, very fast. And then it also gets the application CSS, which is all your CSS combined together, It gets the buzz.css, which is the CSS just for this page. It gets some JavaScript files and some other things that aren't too important for the moment. But this gives you all the information about like performance data,
Nice.
which is nice. It tells you how your page is responding. But it also tells you when you go to submit a form, like you're doing here, how that's working. So go ahead and do another buzz now that we have this open. Yeah. And that may. Oh, I think when we reloaded, so we needed to reload first in order for our form to get that new HTML. So when we added that HTML that said action and method,
Yeah.
it wasn't on our page yet, and so we did a buzz, but we hadn't reloaded the page to get that data. So
Okay.
that's understandable. So here it's saying invalid authenticity token. Oh, I think that means this is a little disappointing because normally Rails is so plug and play. But so let's go into Sublime. I think it's just a matter of setting something up. So go to the application controller under controllers. I think this might be it. If not, it's going to be somewhere else. It's under controller, application controller. Effect from forgery with exception. That's good. So this is, I think, what's raising our error. But I think we need to configure. So under config down below, there's an application.rb. See what's in there. No, it's I think somewhere. It's actually maybe we'll research this. So what's the error again on the web page? Invalid authenticity token. So invalid authenticity token. Stack Overflow. I'm sure this is a very common question. This is forgery. Oh, we don't want to skip the before filter, I don't think. Check to see. Huh. I don't know if you're looking at my page. I'm just sort of doing some research on Stack Overflow.
I do love me some Stack Overflow.
Yeah, definitely. Ruby on Rails security guide is probably what we want. There we go. So this is essentially something that it can allow you to prevent people from submitting things that might seem like they're coming from someone else. Roughly, I don't remember the exact details, but use get if. Might add. Effect from forgery. Security token and non-GET requests would check on the server side in Rails 2 or higher. Application controller. Secret. Okay, so I think we need to define a secret. So let's go back to the application controller. Yeah, still on the left, it didn't get open. It's like the 7th line down.
So
6th. Or maybe you already. Oh, this is the application.rb. You want to be in the application controller. Sorry, that was confusing. I understand.
Oh, okay. So controllers, application controller. Okay,
right.
I got you.
Exception. So I think let's just try this to see if it works. Say at the end of with exception, put comma, secret, colon, and then form a string and just type some random characters into it. Cool. Save that. And go back to the action controller and reload the page with the reload button, and say resend. And still, well, I think we have to go back so that the authenticity. So I should maybe explain this briefly. Go back to the previous page.
Here?
Oh no, in the browser. Back to the previous web page.
Okay.
And then if you reload this page, just manually with the button, yeah. And if you look, I mentioned this very briefly earlier, but if you look at the inspector in these web developer tools, and you click into HTML and click into head, and scroll down a little bit, you see these meta CSRF param and token.
Yeah.
These are generated through some magic. I think using that secret, it's generating this content for the token, and that's passed onto Rails, and it does some more magic to make sure that the page was submitted by a page that was generated by Rails, as opposed to some other person on some other computer submitting the page, pretending to be someone else.
I gotcha.
It's still a security thing that generally is supposed to just work, but it didn't. I don't know that it is in this case. So try buzzing again and see what happens, because I think now that we've invalid authenticity token. Valid. It will automatically include a security token calculated from the current session and server side. An AJAX request generated. This might just be AJAX requests. You won't need the secret if you use cookie storage as session storage. The security token doesn't match what you expected. The session will be reset prior to 3.0 raised. Rails versions prior to 3.0. Okay, maybe this is different. Sorry, this is getting more than I expected. Use persistent cookies to store information. Let's see if we can use a cookie store. So if you go to, oh, my computer's not responding very fast. Yeah, so if you go back to Sublime, and let's go to the application.rb under config. Maybe get rid of that secret first off, the comma and everything after it. Yeah. Save that. And then move on to the application.rb under config. Just down 3/4 of the way down the page, or down the, yeah, there we go.
Thanks.
And maybe times that one, the load path, default locale. How do you specify? I'm wondering, cookie storage. Are you familiar with cookies? I can maybe explain that while I'm looking for this.
Not very. No.
Okay. So cookie is just a way for a website to store a little bit of data. Usually it's just a little bit of data in your browser. For the purposes of, like, as you go from page to page, remembering that data.
Okay.
Which can be handy. So Rails using cookies. And I'm thinking that if I don't see this solution very soon, we can just, instead of using post, we can just do a get, which is not sort of the correct way to do things, but it'll get us by for the moment.
Cool.
Yeah, let's just do that. So, yeah. Oh. Okay, close that. My computer is just responding so slowly. So go back into the buzz controller. And we still don't have create, so that's actually fine. Let's go to the routes. And let's, instead of saying post buzz, let's say get create. Maybe call it create buzz.
Create buzz like that?
Yeah, and then you can get rid of that first string, but it still redirects to the buzz controller and the create action. Yeah,
so like that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
And so now save that and open up the new form page. And we're going to change the action to create buzz.
Does it still have that slash?
Yeah, still has the slash.
Like that?
And then change the method to get. Again, let's make it all caps just for fun. Okay, and so save that. And so if you go back to the browser, this form that you have, or actually hit back, and then we want to reload just to make sure we have the newest version of the page so that we're sending the form to the right place and that we're using the right method. And test is still in there, so say buzz this. Create buzz, missing template, create. Okay, so this is actually great. This is just what we want. Because essentially we haven't created a template, which is the html.erb file. And so that's fine. And if you look into the DOS prompt, you can see what's been submitted. Yep, and so there's an error, but if you scroll up a little bit above the error, we will see a lot of backtrace there. Wow, backtrace there, almost. There we go. Create buzz. So you can see towards the middle there. Processing buzz controller create, which is great. So that means that create buzz got routed to the buzz controller and the create action, which is exactly what we want. And I was hoping that he would say here what params were passed, but it doesn't. But that's fine. I mean, we know what params. Oh, we actually. So no params are passed. That was the problem. That's one problem. So let's do a couple things. Scroll all the way to the bottom here. We'll make it so this error doesn't happen anymore. Very briefly. So go back to the buzz controller. And buzz controller, inside of the create action, we're going to say render space text colon just after the text with no space. And then space.
Sorry, what's that?
So that, yeah, this is perfect, and say space and 2 single quotes.
Oh.
Or double quotes. Either one actually is fine. But
okay.
What this is going to do is, instead of assuming that there's a default create.html.erb, it's going to say, I'm instead going to just render an empty string as my text. And so I'm just going to return nothing. And this is the create action. The new form action will still return that form, but this will return nothing, which is fine. And that's what it was complaining about when when that error came up before. It was saying it couldn't find a template called create.erb.
Okay.
It was actually specifically it's saying it couldn't find a template called buzz/create, and it was looking for various extensions like HTML and .erb and all these other things. So that's essentially what that was talking about. So if we were to resubmit this, we wouldn't have that error. We just have an empty page. But we also want to make one more change. First, save this page. And then we'll go to the new form. And in the text area, we want to add a property that's, before the greater than. We want to say name equals. And then in quotes, say content, because this is going to be the content of our buzz.
Like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then say save. And now go back to the web browser, and we'll go back to the buzz page. So yeah, and reload that. And so now our this is sort of like having the ID or the class when we were talking before about a CSS. You can give form elements a name, and that is the parameter that's going to be passed to wherever the form is going to associate the data. So when you type into the text field, you type in test or type in whatever you're going to type, it needs to have a label that sort of goes along with it. And you'll see that. Go ahead and buzz something, and I'll show you what comes out in the console. Yep. Okay, so nothing happened because it just rendered an empty page, so that's wonderful. And you can see here, parameters content equals new test. So what we've done is the one page, the buzz page, renders our form, and it doesn't require any parameters to it. It's just you go to that page and it gives you the right data. But then with that, there's a form on that page that will submit itself to a new URL, which we've mapped to the create buzz action. The create action in the buzz controller.
Okay.
And so now we have this parameter that we're being given, so we can actually do something with this. This is where it gets exciting, because we can actually create buzz objects now. And so if you go into the controller again, and we'll be getting a hash object. We talked about that last week. We'll be getting a hash object with the params in it, and the one that we want in particular is the content parameter. And so what we do in here is we can say buzz.create, and we'll put that over the render.
I'm sorry. So, is it part of this create thing we're defining here, or?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So
where do I type it?
So as the first line of the create function, you want to say buzz.create. And this is going to be, and it's going to be the buzz class that we're referring to. So capital B.
Gotcha.
And then parentheses, because this is a function call we're making, so we're going to pass in some arguments. And we say content, colon, and space, params, and then square brackets, and inside the square brackets, colon, content. And so what we're doing here is we're accessing the params hash, which has the content key. And when you access the hash with that key, you're going to get the value for content. So it's essentially like the form is being passed in, and this hash contains everything that was in that form. HTML forms can have more than just one thing. They can have a text field, and they can have some checkboxes, and a whole bunch of stuff. And the params is going to give us all that data. And then we actually don't need to specify creator ID, but it's a good idea to specify one so there's always one there.
Okay.
We could actually specify in the definition of the table that it's not possible to ever put a null value in for content ID or for creator ID.
Okay.
But for the moment, let's just put in one. So after the bracket, say comma, creator ID, and then colon, say 1.
Okay.
And that's just going to mean every buzz that comes into our system is going to have a creator ID of 1,
Okay.
which is not ideal, but we can fix it later.
Okay.
It's easy enough to fix. So if we save this, excuse me, let's actually, let's do one other thing. At the beginning of this line, say at buzz equals, so at is in the shift 2, the at character, yep. And then buzz, all lowercase, equals. And in Ruby, at in front of something is just another sort of variable. It's called an instance variable. And they're generally part of a class instance. So, but in this case, they're used in sort of a special way in controllers to pass variables from the controller into the view. And so let's get rid of that line 7 there, the render text. And we're going to pass this buzz variable into the view and actually use it to say, I created a buzz object, just so we can get some feedback. So save the buzz controller, and under the views buzz directory, create a new file. And we'll call it, we need to call it create. Well, we don't need to call it create, but that's the name of the action, and so we're going to call it the same.
So save as?
Save as create.html.erb. Excellent.
Okay.
And then we're going to say you created a buzz with the ID, and then we're going to insert that ID into the page.
Okay.
So just type that out. You don't need to not have a string. This is just an HTML page.
Oh, okay. What do we say? You created a buzz with the ID.
Right. And then say put a colon after the ID just to indicate that there's something that follows, right? And then space, and then here's the syntax for ERB, is less than %. Yeah, it's less than. And then equals. And this equals essentially means that you're inserting the value of what's going to be in here into the page. So say space, and then say @buzz.id. So by creating that @buzz variable, you're defining a variable that can now be accessed inside of the view here. And so we'll say space % greater than. So now this is a dynamic portion of the page which is going to change depending on what the ID of the buzz that was created was.
Nice. Okay.
And so we'll save that. And we'll go to the browser again and go ahead and create a buzz and see what happens. And you actually, since we didn't change the content of the form page, there's no need to reload it.
Okay.
So just FYI. The buzz. There you go. You created a buzz with ID 2.
ID 2.
Yep. And if you reload this page, there'll be another buzz with the same content.
Okay.
There you go. Buzz with ID 3. And so now you have 3 objects in your table, three rows in your table, which would be accessed through Active Record as objects, instantiations of a class.
Okay.
So that's cool. We have that. Do you have a little bit more time? We can make a page that lists all of our buzzes.
We can, yeah.
Okay. So let's do that, because I think that'll round things out nicely for today. So we'll go back to the controller.
So the buzz controller here?
And the standard method name that we call it is index. And index is basically showing us a list of objects in this resource.
Okay, is this part of create, or are we doing a new definition?
This is going to be a new action, so you're going to create a new method.
So, like that?
Exactly. Call it index. Yep. And then say, put an end there. And inside of this method, we're going to create a variable with all of the buzzes. Like you said, this is not a good idea to do generally, but we're going to do this as sort of an example.
Okay.
So at buzzes equals buzz.all. Yeah, and then it's capital B for the buzz class. Yep. And so now we'll create, save that. We'll create an HTML page called index.html.irb. And it's going to be under the buzz directory under views.
I'm sorry, what did you say it was called?
Since the action is called index, we're going to call this index.html.erb. These all match up with the various actions that are happening inside of the controller.
Okay.
You can get more complicated, and you can have one action render a completely different file if you want to, but that sort of goes against the grain, and you only really do it if you really, really need to.
Okay.
So that's just FYI. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to use a slightly different ERB syntax. We're going to say less than % space at buzzes dot each space do space. We're going to create a block like we talked about last week. Pipe buzz and then end the pipe. And usually I don't put spaces here. Yeah, perfect. And then to end that is just % greater than. So it's sort of a similar syntax to HTML pages, but this is Ruby ERB syntax, allowing you to insert dynamic code. And then we want to have another line that has the end, because we're specifying a block here with this do, and so we want to have the end, but that end needs to be surrounded by less than % as well. Call it the % tag. And then for the moment, let's say, so you could see before on the other page we did less than % equals, and here we're not doing that because we don't actually want to output the content. We just want to have code in the page. But here now we want to use the less than % equals. So to do a tab, since we're sort of indenting, since we're in a loop, in a block, and say less than % equals and say buzz.id. And this is going to be referring to the variable that we are passing in to the loop, so it's going to be lowercase b. I know that's confusing, but yep. And then end that tag and save it. So this is going to go in a loop through all of the buzzes that were passed in from the controller, and it's just going to output the IDs, which is pretty straightforward. And so if we go, we've created the buzz controller action, we've created the index page. Now we need to go to the routes to create a route for this. And we're going to say get, and we'll call this buzzes because we're getting a list of the buzzes. And then do the equals greater than buzz for the buzz controller, pound index. And then you have a plus instead of an equals.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Thanks.
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
And so this is going to, again, the slash buzzes URL is going to take us to the index action in the controller. And that rendering is going to happen. So save this, and then we'll go to the browser and see what happens when we go to buzzes.
Just reload?
Well, we want to change the URL. So instead of create buzz and content new buzz and all that, we just want to say buzzes. Well, no, we want to have all the localhost stuff because we want to have our domain. That's always there.
That?
Yeah, and then have an S at the end so we can go to that different URL.
Ah.
And then there's our IDs.
Cool.
So we outputted those. And we could output the content if we wanted to. We could also output these in a table format, which involves a little more syntax. There's like 3 tags that are involved in outputting a table. Actually, maybe we'll do that just as sort of a final thing, because I think it'll look better and it'll sort of be more satisfying. So if we go back into, we've already set up the infrastructure, so we really just need to change the index.html.erb file. And we want to put a table tag around everything.
From the very beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And put the table tag in its own line, and it doesn't get a slash there in the top.
No, I guess it wouldn't.
And then that one has a slash at the beginning.
At the beginning?
Yeah.
Like that? At the end too, or no?
Just at the beginning, yeah.
Okay.
And so that is going to define a table tag around everything.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to now define row tags. So inside of the each, make a new space on line 3. Like a new hit return, yeah. And we're going to do a TR tag, stands for table row.
Slash at the beginning? Or
no, so not the first tag, no slashes. It's all lowercase. Mm-hmm. And then after line 4, we insert a new line, and that's where we put a slash TR tag. And so this is going to define a table row. We want to probably indent that. And then we make a TD tag, which stands for table data.
Mm.
And so you can put those all in the same line on line 4, but you want to surround the buzz ID with a TD tag. Perfect. And then if you copy and paste that line and put onto the next line.
Like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then instead of saying ID, change that to content. Awesome. And save that. And now when you reload the page, you should see a table format with the IDs and the contents of the different buzzes. Yeah.
Sweet.
And so you can't quite see, there's no borders on the table cells, but it is outputted in sort of a tableized format, you can see.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. And you can have as many columns as you want on the table. You know, it's for outputting tabular data.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's sort of a sore point in the HTML and CSS world is that, it's not exactly a sore point, but it used to be the case that a lot of people would lay out their page by creating a table. You know, so if they want to have a menu bar, that would be one row that extends across the table, and then they'd have maybe a sidebar, and then the content of the page, and all that would be done through tables.
Mm-hmm.
But so the proper way to do that is through CSS and actually creating div objects, which you give positions to
Okay.
in certain ways. The table tag is there for outputting tabular data, kind of like this.
Okay.
And you can kind of think about that like in the form of like a database table or a spreadsheet or something like that when you're outputting something. And part of the reason for that is this whole, again, coming back to this whole idea of content and style, and those being two different things. And if you're specifying a table in your document, that is sort of saying something about what's inside of it, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like someone could come along and they might want to parse your HTML file and like I want to go across the entire web, but I want to pull out all of the data from all of the tables everywhere.
Okay.
If someone wanted to do that, it would be much easier if everybody stuck to the convention of putting tabular data in tables as opposed to putting, their blog content in one of the cells of their tables.
Gotcha.
It just makes a lot less sense. So.
Sure. I gotcha.
So that was a lot to go over. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that you didn't quite catch? I know there was a lot, and I know there was I was telling you to do pretty much everything. What did you understand? What didn't you understand? Let's ask that way.
Okay. All right. Well, honestly, a lot of the structure of how everything worked here, where we're making controllers and we're making routes, and I'm pretty fuzzy on that.
Sure.
Yeah, that would probably be the big question.
Okay. Sure. So, this does take some getting used to.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things about Rails is that sort of there's a old saying is that there's a place for everything and everything is in its place.
Okay.
And so if you go once you sort of get these conventions, and I can explain them again, but once you get these conventions, it makes it much easier to go from one Rails application to the other and figure out where things are.
Okay.
In the past, when people would create web pages, they, would create an HTML page which would have dynamic stuff inside of it, and everybody would do things in sort of their own way, and it was pretty chaotic and difficult to be able to transition from if someone had created a web page already, and then you were asked oh, this person has left now, I need someone to come in and have a look at this. You'd probably be tearing your hair out because you're trying to figure out how they did everything.
Okay.
Whereas Rails, you still tear your hair out definitely with Rails.
But you have the satisfaction of knowing there's a way they should have done it, huh?
Right, exactly. Either there's a way they should have done it, or there's other things that they didn't necessarily. I mean, there's always room to do things, quote unquote, the wrong way, or to quote unquote, just to do things in a sort of weird way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But one of the nice things about Rails is that it does get you to put things in the right places a lot more of the time.
Cool.
So, but yeah, so just to cover it again, the routes is so the general idea of a web page, of a web application, is ignoring the specific implementation of routes and controllers and views and models and all these things. The job of a web application is to take a URL that it's given and to respond to that URL.
Okay.
And that's a pretty simple task on the surface. The only thing that's sort of in addition to that is sometimes you're given additional data with the URL. Like a form, when it submits to a URL, it gives some extra data about what was in the form.
Okay, so like with our thing, so we had the URL that was the Buzz website, and then we put hey, what's up, Brian, as one of the things in it. Is that right or no?
Right, and so that when you went to /buzz,
yep,
that gave you that was just the web application responding and saying oh, at that URL I give you a form. And so it gave us a form, which is an HTML page which has that form in it. And then that form inside of it has specified another URL to go to send its data. And so when the browser, is given input from the user, and then the submit button is clicked, it takes all that data together, and it takes that URL, and it goes to that URL and says, like, okay, here URL, here's the data I've been given. It's just making another web request essentially, and the web application comes back with, what it's supposed to come back with, which could be anything that you want it to do. And so really, again, the job of a web application is to take a URL and respond. It's just a request and a response, request and response, request and response all the time. And so the entry point to that is sort of the routes file. The routes file essentially says, okay, if I'm given a certain URL, what should I do with this URL? And actually, if you go to the browser, let's type in a URL that you actually haven't ever that we haven't actually specified, and see what happens.
So what do we type in? Just
so
anything?
at the end, keep the localhost 3000, but type in something, some word that we haven't used yet. Crazy, perfect. So it says routing error. And essentially, this is the application saying, I don't have anything that tells me how to deal with this. And so that's what the routes file is for, is to say, you've specified a certain URL, what is the application supposed to do with it? What controller do I need to give that to, and what action in the controller do I need to give it to specifically?
Okay.
So that's the routes file job, and it's pretty straightforward and simple. And then the controller defines the logic of what it's supposed to do when it responds to the page. So if it's given certain data, it might process that data or do something with it. It might create an object. It might delete an object. It might change an object. It might do lots of other things. And then it'll respond with another HTML page generally, which has a sort of user-facing description of what happened. And so, again, this is all within the context of the request-response cycle, that you make a request, you get a response back. And so that's the bread and butter of how web pages work and how web browsers work.
Interesting. Okay.
And part of it is I think that's a overview. Although definitely let me know if you have any questions. But part of it is also just sort of getting used to iterating on this and doing it over and over again until it's sort of like, oh, I get what's happening.
Yeah.
I get why it says this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think I need to just play with it a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, no, makes sense though.
Any other questions that you can think of on that note? Feel free to look at things and be like, what was this? And because there's multiple files, so it can get a little like, what is this referring to, and how's this working? All of that.
I can't really think of any other specific questions right now.
Okay, gotcha. So I think that's probably good for now. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to mention. Oh, the other thing I realized that I didn't cover, that I probably should have, is how to create a link in a page, which is kind of one of the fundamental building blocks of the entire web.
Okay, yeah.
Is being able to click on links between different things. But maybe we'll leave that for next week.
Okay.
Because that actually might clarify a couple things. Having a form is built, I think, for this task of creating buzzer, because that's what people do, is they type in a form what they want to buzz, and then it does something with it.
Gotcha.
But there's also going to be links going back and forth between different places. So I'll leave you to sort of process this. You can look over this application and email me if you have any questions. We can talk about them next week, or we can do whatever. And feel free to do some research and come back with questions either through email or
Yeah.
next week or whatever, because it's fundamental stuff. So
Cool. So, listeners, apparently you've got to tune in next week to learn about the fundamental building block, which is links. It's going to be super exciting.
That's my bad, but we probably won't be
I think
released.
that's great.
Yeah,
You always
totally.
got to leave them wanting more, right?
Exactly. I should not teach about like what should I not I shouldn't teach about how to do any like styling until like 10 episodes in, right? Because styling is so useful.
Nice.
Right. Cool. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye to our listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Goodbye, listeners.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Now I have to actually end this thing. Oh, there we go. Good time. My computer is running hot.
Running hot. Would you?
It's just, I'm still recording here. It's just processing really hard. And
Okay.
the fan is going really hard. Come on. It might be because it's been recording for so long.
Oh, okay.
Oh, come on. Quick time. Let's close this. Yeah, that's fine. All right, there you are. Recording. Wonderful. That's why it wasn't